Hi, everybody. This is Tracy Brent Riches from Limestone Charter Association, and this is the Finances and Facilities webinar for your application. First, let me apologize that I could not do that on Tuesday, and we're having to do this as a nobody on webinar, but I just couldn't foresee what was going to happen. And so let's get started. These two sections are extremely important in your application, but more so once you get approved, because these two things right here is what you will spend a majority of your time on. All right, let me see if I can get it rolling here to change the okay, there we go. So first we're going to talk about your budget. And as we all know, a budget is just an estimation of your revenues versus your expenditures. And in this application, you have to do a 5-year, which is detailed, and a 10-year, which is an overview. So both of those are going to be required. So you do your 5-year first, and then you expand it to 10 years. You turn these in as an Excel spreadsheet in your budget. Now, my very first suggestion is do not do this at home, right? Do not do this by yourself. You need to ask for some help here. The people who do financial services for charter schools are usually very willing to help pro bono, just basically to get your business and hang on to you. Not always though, but they are usually willing to do it pro bono if you decide to go somewhere else. That's obviously your decision. Just because you use them to help you on the application does not mean you have to use them all the time. So reach out to people who do that. If you want to give me a call, I can give you some suggestions and put some information out there for you. But please don't do this section by yourself unless you've got someone who has actually worked in a district office or worked at a charter school and was responsible for the budget, because there's just too many parts for this. Okay, so the items that need to be in your budget are your projected enrollment. We all understand this is a projection. A projected revenue based on the EFA codes, and we'll talk about those shortly. Your expected expenditures, your teachers, your supplies, your insurance, all those things that it takes to run a school. And you probably don't really realize what all those are, which is why I'm telling you to work with someone who has done this before. And a realistic assumption of the cost of these things. And let's be clear, right? And this is COVID, so, and everything costs more because of the supply chain and all that kind of stuff. So when you're looking at furniture, make sure you're really looking at what furniture costs. So go to Amazon, go to Google, find those things, go to Hertz or K-12, all those places that sell furniture, and get a real estimate, because come next year, that might really be what you're paying. And you'll have to have a cash flow projection because you really need to keep a month of fund balance, but that is super hard for a school, a brand new school. And so really you're just hoping to get to the end of the year with a fund balance. Okay, projected enrollment and revenue. So when projecting enrollment, some things you want to consider: where your school's going to be, how many kids will it hold, you need to know something about the demographics of that area, because you'll need to have an idea of how many pupils in poverty do you think you're going to have. Are you putting your school in a local area where the community itself qualifies for free and reduced lunch? So do that research. We've talked about research before you ever get to the finance part. You should have all that information already written in your application. Now, as a charter school under Limestone, you will not get any local money at all. It all comes from state and federal sources. So right now, the base student cost is $25.16. You get 100% of that. A traditional district does not, but you will get $25.16. And because you do not get local money, then you will get the proviso, is what we call it. And that is $3,600 per child, plus the weight of the child, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And you'll get fringe benefits. So on your 45-day count, how many kids do you have? And that's what your fringe benefits are going to be based on for your teachers. If you already have some grant money or promised money, Please, if you have a letter that says this money is promised to you by a foundation or whatever else, once you get approved, stick that in there. That's great. That is wonderful. We'd love to see that. Love to see that. Okay, so talking about weightings and add-ons, and this is where the majority of your money comes from. So there's either a weighting, which is what grade the child is in, whether or not they're a student with disability, whether or not they're a high school student that takes a vocational class. Those are the weight of the child. So it used to be that kindergarten through high school had a different weight, but now they're all 1.0 because they took that and put it into the add-ons not too long ago. And so every child you have is worth 1.0. So if you have your 3,600 and your 2,516, you add those together times 1.0, that's the weight of the child. But if that child has a disability, and when you write this application, you should assume this, that 10% of your population will be a student with disability. 10%. If you're in elementary school and you're starting K through 5, you should divide, because this is typically what you're going to see, you should divide that 10% by speech, because your younger kids usually you have more speech and they grow out of it. They basically have services that helps them get out of it and be dismissed from speech. On the lower end, you're going to have more speech kids. When you get to like 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, you're going to have your disability is going to be more learning disabled, because about 3rd grade, when we're having trouble reading, that's when LD kids typically get identified. So depending on how you're starting in grade wise, if you're starting K through 2, then you need to put all 10% of yours, or 8% in speech and 10% in LD. And the reason I just say LD, like you really might have some children with autism and those are a higher weight, but just for the application, that's what we're looking for, is those 2 huge categories of speech or LD. Now, if you are an AEC and you are opening a school specific for children with autism, then change yours to speech and then autism. And that weighting is a 2.57. But if you're not, then stick to these, because these are just assumptions based on where charter schools stand as a whole. Now, if you're opening high school and you are going to make sure that every child, or not every child, just any child that has a CATE course, a career and technology education course that we talked about when we talked about federal programs, that child has a weighting of 1.29. And so that's a huge difference, right? It's a huge difference. So you add your 3,600, your 2,516, and then you times it times, for speech 1.290, 1.90, for LD 1.74, and for vocational 1.29. You use the highest weight of the child. So right now you're just estimating, but when you get to the reality, you might have a child that's in high school that is LD, but is also taking a vocational class. You're going to weight that child as being LD, because that's the highest weight. They get you the most money for your child. So those are basic weightings. Now we talk about all those other things that are just add-ons. So meaning that you could be a child who's in high school that is LD, but is also taking dual enrollment. So that child's highest weighting would be LD. And then you would add on the 0.15 because they're taking dual enrollment classes. So academic assistants would be kids who have been struggling, that have a proven record of struggling, meaning that they took the state assessment and did not pass it, did not meet it. And so you would, those identified under academic assistance, if you're opening a school and you're not starting K through 2, you've got 3rd through or 4th through up, you're going to have some kids who are going to come to you that have already been identified as academic assistants, You'll also have high achieving, which is also thought of as gifted and talented. And those things would add on. But for that, there's a whole nother situation of you have to provide, if you're going to have gifted and talented, you have to have a teacher that is gifted and talented certified in order to get that money. So, but pupils in poverty, when you get children, they're going to fill out their paperwork and you're going to know whether or not they fit into the category of people in poverty. And then you would add that way. For the estimate of this application, you should be looking at the school closest to you that you are pulling the most kids from, you think, or if there's 2 or 3 schools together, take an average of their free and reduced lunch, people in poverty, and that's what you will put into your budget. At Limestone, we want to be clear. This is estimated budget. This budget is to prove to us that you understand the giant monster that is school finance, right? And funding and how it works. It's huge. It's got lots of moving parts. It's very different than a lot of other states. And so this is just giving us a projection and showing us you understand. You will actually give us a real budget by June 1st, right before you open, because by June 1st, you have kids, you know exactly who they are. And while you will be funded on the projection of what is in this application, that these two situations help us see, one, if you really had an idea when you wrote this application what you were going to get, and 2, did you go out there and recruit the kids you said you were going to recruit, and do you look like that? And so you're going to have to make some changes when you get past that opening day. You're going to get to what you call a 5-day count. And that 5-day count is what we call the day of reckoning. So you might tell me, based on these weightings and add-ons, that you're going to have 100 high schoolers and they're all going to be vocational, and you think you're going to have 20% pupils in poverty, or you think you're going to have, or maybe 20% academic assistance. You can put those reasonable numbers based on your research into your application. Now, 5th day comes, you only got 80 kids, you have more poverty, less dual enrollment, all that's all going to filter out, and your budget's going to look real. You're going to have a better idea of what that actually is going to be when you give me that budget in June, because you have kids at that point, you have all their information, or you should, because you should be already collecting their applications. And once you have their applications, then of course that comes along with all their school records. So you should have a much better idea of where you are come June, but you're going to be funded in July and August and maybe September. It just depends. That sometimes it's not, sometimes it is, on your 5th day count, because it really depends on what day your 5th day count falls on. So, all right, projected expenditures. Let's talk about what that is. Some items that need to be considered are, let me move this, sorry, just a second for you here. Okay, what do you got to buy to make this happen? What are the students' needs? Do you have to buy curriculum? If you tell me you're going to use such and such a curriculum, that needs to show up in your budget and tell me how much it is. What kind of technology? That should show up in your budget. Are you going to tell me that you're going to be a school that serves a high population of special education students? So you need to show me how many special ed teachers are you going to have, what supplies, what professional development for all that. That needs to show up in the assumptions in your budget. So we're going to look at that and make sure that you're telling me one thing in the application and your budget's telling me the same thing, right? I mean, there's some basics, and this is where your financial people will really help you, because they know what it is for similar schools. How much is electricity? How much is rent? And that you're going to be estimating really seriously there, because you don't really have to have a facility yet. How much is trash service? How much is water? How much is insurance, right? All those things you will need to put into this application, and they already know that from similar schools. Personnel needs. board needs. So obviously your board needs to be trained. Now the state does that free, but your board might want to go to a conference that's for school boards. They might want to go to the national, and I totally promote this. You could go to the state and the national charter school conference and participate in the board sections, right? And then again, like I just said, the operational and maintenance needs. All of that needs to be in your application. And again, if you need a sample, reach out to me. I'll give you a sample, but I'm going to tell you, don't use that sample verbatim. You really need somebody to help you. Okay. You need to explain your projections. So if I want you to tell me, we think we have 20% because this of poverty, because this is what our area around this place where we want to put our school looks like. Now, that might not actually end up being exactly what happens based on where you end up having to put this building. But at least it tells me that you know how to do the research and what to be looking for in order to make your budget work for the school. Now, this is only for Limestone, because the other two authorizers in your local district is not going to tell you you can do this. But as in opening 3 schools, and have been in charter school for 10 years, schools typically get the planning implementation. We are one of the few states in the bigger picture of the country that actually have the state grant. So you do not have to apply to the feds for this grant money. You get just to apply to the state. And the state has been excellent at working with schools to make sure they get this money. So long as that is reasonable and your federal money for IDA, if you Title II, I would suggest you not put Title I, just because that is such a moving target of whether or not you will be a Title I school. But those are things you're going to get. Keep them very reasonable, and your budget shouldn't make or break on on that money. But you're going to get IDA money, and you're going to get Title II money. You may or may not get Title I money. That's why I wouldn't put it in there. But again, when you work with those people that do this, they understand what's reasonable and not going to break your budget if for some reason you didn't get that money, because you would still have to cover those costs if you're going to spend that. Because understand, you will not see any federal money in your bank account until December at the earliest, but most likely in that January, February time, because you got to get a plan approved. After you get open, you got to get a plan approved. All that has to go up to the State Department as a district level, not as a school level. So you might have yours great, but the other school over there has got some work. They can't send it all in until it's all together and correct, that they know it's going to get approved. So you're not going to see that money anytime soon in the fall. So that cash flow gets a little funky for most schools around October. All right. Okay. But wait, I'm going to go back to this one more time. The federal planning money and the federal money that would be IDA, Title II, is money that you can estimate. Now, the planning money, because I want to say a few more words about that. The planning money, right, for this past year, or the last time I did it, I guess it was the school just opened, so the year before that, was $800,000 for 3 years. That's not what it's going to be coming up. It's just not. So at most, I would put into your budget of your 5-year is about 200 max. And again, hope you don't try not to bust your budget if you had to take that out, because basically what that would mean is you'd have to take out things that you had put to that. And for the planning, you can buy furniture, you can contract services for special ed or for tutoring or for anything that's supplemental. You can buy technology. You can have a contractor that runs the grant, that's your project director that gets the school open. I solely suggest you do that. That's super, super important. And that's somebody that's dedicated to do all this stuff, so that the board's not trying to do a little here, a little of that. You need a very focused one-person focal point. You can contract for curriculum development. Now, curriculum development meaning that you're trying to put all those parts together, because you really in our state have to have your curriculum kind of picked out and everything before to get this grant. So reasonable, and don't bust your budget if it's not there. Okay. Cash flow projections, estimated of the timing and amounts of cash flows in and out. And so understand that you will get a state allocation every single month, and that state allocation goes up and down based on the number of students you have and the weight of those children. When you get your benefits, fringe benefits, and all the EIA extra pots of money, those are not in the beginning. Those take a little while to get. And again, this is what I'm telling you, don't do this yourself. Go work with some people that do this. So they'll have a better idea of when you're starting to see that money, and that'll help you with your cash flow projection. I'm telling you now, the best thing you can do is once you get approved, go to the bank and see if you can get a line of credit. You are going to need it. You're going to need it for the planning because you've got to pay all of that up front, and you're going to need it when you hit that cash flow problem because you're paying out all this federal money, like you're paying your sped teacher on IDA money, right? So but you still got to pay the sped teacher every 2 weeks or every month, however you set it up. You're not going to see that money until February or January, December at the earliest, but you still had payroll. That line of credit will help you do those things. Now, when you write the P&I grant, you're going to get that starting in July of the year prior to you opening. So you've got to have a line of credit to start spending money so that you can run through that grant. My suggestion is try to get about $40,000 if you can, because if you're going to contract with somebody there and they leave their job, they need to be getting paid. And you've got professional development to get created. You've got things just to buy. You've got rent to pay for having because in the grant, you're going to have an office space where the public can come. You got that, there's furniture to buy. You might have to store that furniture because you found it in a good deal. And I will tell you, start looking at the govdeals.com, I think, or whatever it is, where school districts are trying to sell furniture. Because let me tell you, they all got tons of ESSER money, and there's going to be a ton of nice furniture that's going to be out there for sale, and you need to catch it while it's cheap. And that's what your P&I money will do for you. And then pay for a storage to hang on to it, because what you're going to get it for is going to be super cheap, because they got all new stuff and they need to get rid of the old stuff. And typically they will do that at the end of the year. So be looking for that. Be looking for those auction websites and just look, I'm pretty sure it's called govdeals.com. That is the best place to look. All right, so there are a couple of manuals if you wanted to look through them. And what it will do in these manuals, it'll explain kind of the process for state funding, but it will give you the code numbers for each thing. So 100 is salaries, 200 is benefits, 300 is purchase services, that's anybody you're contracting with, 400 supplies, and so on and so on and so on. Like there's one for facilities, for capital outlay, that you'll get through that handbook, but those are massive handbooks. So please find somebody to use. And if you went to the conference, you met a bunch of those people, they were there. And if you didn't, call me and I'll help you find somebody. Okay, now let's talk about facilities, because this is the biggest stumbling block and headache that schools have beyond anything else, right? Okay. All right. When you write this application, you do not have to have a facility in hand, because no one's going to commit to you because you don't have anything to tell them that you really need this building or can pay for a building, right? But what is required is a general idea of where the area you wish to be located, and you understand the demographics of the area. So if you're trying to do a school that is a high is a high population Title I because you're trying to serve pupils in poverty, then you cannot locate your school in an area where the mean average income is $75,000 or higher. You just can't do that, right? So you're going to go find a place, and this is pretty common sense, where those areas are, and start looking for land or a building that you can renovate in those areas. Right. So I want you to show me in there, give me a list of places where you looked and they were good or bad, but you've looked. Now, if there's a building, that is the building we want because it's already a school building and the school district doesn't want it anymore. Hey, I'm good with that. But what happens if you don't get that building? Because the school district now decided that, well, we're not going to sell it, because if they do decide to sell it, they have to offer it to charter schools before they can offer it to anybody else. So you get charter schools get the right of first refusal for schools buildings that school districts own in this, and that was bought with state money, or it was bought with public money. And so they have to offer it to you. But they decide, oh no, I don't want a charter school, so I'm not selling that building now. We're going to hang on to it. They have to do something with it. So they're going to make it the storage for all their furniture that they just replaced, right? So that happens all the time. So that might be the building you want, but you need to have a second and third choice around. And I need to see that you have actually researched facility financing. There is a ton of companies out there, and I do mean a ton now of companies. And if you were at the conference, you could tell there's like a whole bunch of them. They all have a booth, right? And they want to sell you a building. They want to buy a building for you, and then sell it to you later. Show me some research that shows that you have looked into what that is, what the cost of that might be. And then evidence as soon as you're approved that you will be ready to move forward with securing a facility. So if you've done all of the things above, then that pretty much tells me that you're ready to get rolling. And when I tell you, once you get approved, you need to get rolling, you cannot wait. You have a year and a half. And the process to get a building together and ready or built is arduous. And so you got to be on it. Now, here are some options that we typically see about facilities. You can find a facility that somebody owns. Businesses went out of business. An old grocery store, a box grocery store. A guy owns it, company owns it, some woman owns it, whatever. And they would like something in it, but they don't want to sell the building. But they'll do the upfits for you. But that means that you're going to sign a lease for a really long time. And most likely you're going to sign a lease, and then you're going to sign a loan agreement that you pay along with your rent every month at whatever percentage for them to make it a school for you. That's one option. The other option is somebody owns a building. They just own it because it's a tax write-off. They're good with it being whatever, but they're not going to put any money into it. But you can, but they still own it, which means in these first two situations, you are walking away from your building and all the money you put into it, just like, because it's a lease. But this happens all the time. And sometimes this is still an okay situation if you're there long enough in the building for it to be worth it. If you can be in that building for 10 years, that still might be the cheapest thing for you to do. This is just part of doing your research and finding what's out there. Developer funding. That is basically where a company will go and buy the building for you, fix it up for you, make it a school, but they're your landlord now, just like number one. And you're going to pay a rent at an escalated cost per year. That's pretty common. And because one of the things you've got to understand when you see this and you're like, let me pick myself off of the floor based on the interest rates of this, is that you got nothing, guys. You have a piece of paper that says you're approved for a charter school, but you've got nothing. So all the risk is on the developer. Now, you don't make it for some reason. You don't get enough enrollment. You can't make your rent. You don't make it. And you get shut down because you don't have enough kids to keep going. They're stuck with a building in a place that maybe nobody would make it. What are they going to do with that building, right? So the risk is on them, and they get paid nicely for that risk. But one of the things that's happened right now, partly because of COVID and, the interest rates have fallen like a rock. And also that's happening is the bond companies, and that is kind of like just having a mortgage, and your mortgage is basically the bond holder, but it's a mortgage, not just a lease, right? They're really getting into first time charter school openings. That's really starting to happen now after 25 years, 30 years of having charter schools since the 90s. So it's really starting to open up. And this is the deal you want to find if you can find it. Even if you end up with a bond at like 6%, that's just magical, right? Because 5 years from now, you can probably refinance that bond and go down to 3%, because then you've got 5 years of financial history, you've got 5 years of academic history. And so it makes the bondholders feel a little bit better. But because the interest rates are so low right now and there's so much cash out there, the bond companies are just doing big deals. And a lot of the developers who used to lease it and buy it back to you are now just being the bond people. And so there's lots of options out there. Do some research, show me in your application that you have a clue, so that when we say, yes, you're approved for this charter, you're not now having to step back and say, I have no idea what I'm going to do about a building. All right. And I've been through this a bunch. And if it could happen crazy, it's probably happened to me. I'll be glad to help you guys. All you have to do is call me and I'll help you walk through some of that stuff. Okay, so this is why it's arduous on getting a building done. So here's the people involved in the buildings. First, you have your group. You have a planning committee. You got your charter approved. Yay, that's great, right? Now what do we do? Right? So hopefully you already have a commercial realtor engaged, and they've been helping you look as you write this application for places to be. And again, if you don't know any that you think have some school experience, it's really good if they have school experience. Then let me know. I've got a couple of those I can suggest to you. Now, and I'll say somebody that I was remiss in putting on this list, and that is the Department of Transportation. And so they are one organization that can say, no, you can't put your school here. There's just no way, based on the traffic patterns, that we could work that out. You cannot put your school here. You just can't do it. They're not going to approve it. And I did not put them on here, and I should have, because they're like super important. But you have a design professional that you're going to be working with. And this can happen in multiple different ways of how that works, that you choose a design professional. And that is an architect or an engineer. It really depends on what you need to happen. It depends on how big are the renovations to this building, whether or not you can just use an engineer or you need an actual architectural firm who's done schools before. Then you have a contractor. That's the person obviously doing the work. And in just a second, I want to explain to you how that works a little bit. You have a financing agent. That's either your developer, and sometimes the developer is the contractor. And sometimes the developer is just the money person, and you got to go out and find the contractor. Then when you're building this building, you as the school have to hire, you have to hire an appraiser as well. But your third party inspector is super important, because that is the person that works for you, that is overseeing what's happening in the construction based on the plans, based on what's been approved, to make sure that's really happening by the contractor. And you hire that person, not the contractor. Then the biggie is the Office of School Facilities. That is the office that actually gives you your certificate of occupancy. Now, you'll have to do permitting locally. Like if you're going to be in Richland County, you got to go to Richland County permitting board and all that kind of good stuff, wherever you're going to be. And that depends, that changes by being in the city in Greenville, being in the county in Horry County, or being in Marion County. It all different depending on where you are. But what is the same, no matter where you are, is the Office of School Facilities and their requirements. The code for school is the highest code. As you can imagine, nobody wants to see our children be hurt by an unsafe building. And so you might walk into a building and say, oh, this is a great building, right? And the Office of School Facilities is going to walk in there and say, oh, no, it's not. And here's all the things that, we're going to be looking at. But your architect and engineer can also tell you that if they do school work. And so you really want to stick with somebody who has done school work, right? But your plans have to be approved by all school facilities. They deal with all schools in South Carolina, so it's not a quick turnaround ever. So you can't wait forever to be finding the building and then figuring out, okay, here's going to be our architect and our contractor, and then let's get something done and it be April. You have to have this done prior to Christmas, or you will not be in that building most likely in July or August. Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Oh, let me go back to this. I forgot. I was going to tell you how this works. If the building is already done and you're making some minor facility upfits, typically you can get an engineer, they get a plan, they turn it into OSF, you go hire a contractor, or the owner of the building does. If you're doing a big project and you're like completely, it needs, you have a building you want to buy. So the school I just did, Pace, found what used to be a big grocery store, and it has the auxiliary little stores beside it. It had been bought by a church. It'd been a church forever and ever and ever, but they never really used these areas. That's a big, huge project. It's 40,000 square feet. This is a big, huge project. So we did what we call a design build. And that means that we put it out to contractors and said, we're doing a design build. So you're basically a little bit building it as you go. Contractors go out and pick the architects. They pick the architects and they come and make their bid to you, because you got to put it on RFP as a group together. You can say, I really like these architects because they've done a lot of schools. I like the work they do. And the contractor will consider that. Not going to guarantee you they're going to do that, because they might already have a partnership with someone. Or the opposite. Look, I've heard some nightmares about this particular architecture firm and I don't want to use them. And the contractor will say, well, you know, we really do work with them and these are the issues that happened. Or they'll tell you, okay, no problem, we won't use them. Because it's the contractor who's controlling this situation. Okay. So they're going to do what they can do to get your business. And so they're going to bring to the table who you really want brought to the table, most likely. Right. And they're going to make a bid, and you're going to decide on the ones that you have put it out there to and pick one. Right. So the contractor and the architect and you are all sitting at the same table at the same time saying, here's what's reasonable. Here's what I want to see. How do we make that happen? And it is a collaborative effort. And there is meetings and meetings and meetings. The architect's going to go back and do the design, come back to the table. Everybody's going to be saying that. The contractor might say, that's going to be too expensive. They're not going to be able to afford it because we just did a school that wanted to do that. And this is what it costs. Again, this is why you really do not want to work with people that have never done schools, because you do not have the luxury of years of time. You have a year and a half. And that's really not even that, depending on when you get approved. So, you know, make sure you stay with people who've done schools. Now, so that's called a design build. On the other side, like a little earlier, you know, it might be that the building doesn't need a ton of work. So you're going to go ahead and just find an architect, figure out what you want. And then after that, after there's approved plans, you put it out to bid. And then a contractor will pick it up or not and say that's too little, or yeah, we do that kind of work. And then then the architect is driving that process, right? As opposed to a design build where the contractor is driving that process. So I've done both things. It really depends on the size of the project. Again, if you need some more guidance about that, just give me a call. I'll walk you through that. No problem. Okay. But here's important that you need to understand. You're out there recruiting and saying, hey, we're going to open. You're building anywhere near opening. Right. And let me tell you, parents will drive by this building every day, every single day, and want to know what's the progress, right? When a traditional school is opening a new school, you know, they don't really have to be ready by the beginning of school. They could tell kids in December, you're going to change. Now, I typically don't do that, but those kids are still in the space where they are. no foul, no harm. They're there. When you do that and you're recruiting these kids and parents are filling out their applications and they're ready to move to your school and they might be moving so they're closer to the school so they can drive it and make it because they need your school so bad. And then you don't open because your building's not ready. Nothing good comes from that. So when I'm telling you, you better be on it about this facility, I am telling you, you better be on it. And I will be on you every step of the way to help you through this facility process. Make sure you open in time, because we as Limestone certainly do not want to authorize a school that just can't get it done, and it causes a lot of bad feelings from parents and teachers, because if you don't open in time, then all your kids are going back to regular school and they're not coming back. You've hired teachers, now they got nowhere to go, right? And typically what you see happen here is that if your building's not ready, you got to go find somewhere that's going to take you, that you're still going to have to put money into, but maybe not as much, like a church. Yeah, that's typically where you see it. Churches, because they already have classrooms set up. And you're going to spend a whole bunch of money just to get that done while your building's still finishing. And that's just wasted money, because you're only going to be there 6 months, a year at max. And then you're going to move into your new building. So this process is arduous. It's complicated. So you really have to be really very focused on this, and you need someone on your committee that this is all they're focused on. Not recruitment, not curriculum, just facilities, right? So now let's say that you do start, but you start late. So I just want to tell you, there's still repercussions to that, because the way the 5th day count works is that the state takes whatever base student cost that normally would have gone to the local districts comes to you. That comes to you. And so they need to know very quickly where those kids are coming from, so that they're not sending money to Richland 2 or Bamberg or wherever you're going to be, Greenville or Charleston. They're not sending the money to that. They're sending it to you. And then again, so if they can't have that 5th day count, it takes longer to do that. But even bigger than that is federal money, because your whether or not you're going to be a Title I school is based on that federal money. So they cannot allocate federal money to any district until they get all the counts from all the new charter schools. And so see, the local school, the older charter schools, unless they're adding a grade and getting bigger, then they're based on their 135-day count. If you're adding a grade or getting massively bigger, just because you're adding students, not necessarily grades, but in new schools, that 5th day count is super important, and you have to be ready for it. So you have to be open as quick as you can, so that your 5th day count isn't months away. Sorry, my dogs are barking. So that's basically where we are. I hope that you heard something you didn't already know. And please give me a call and talk to me if you have any questions. We have one more of these things, and I'm going to go back through the application before next week and just find any particulars that I think I haven't really covered well enough. And it's just time for you to sit and ask me questions. So if you want to email me questions before that, I can get those incorporated into the PowerPoint. Or if you just want to be on live and ask me questions, that's great. So see you next week. Okay.